Welcome, everyone. This show has a tendency to focus more on domestic issues, on the economy, healthcare, education, the environment. So we're delighted today to be talking about an issue that needs a lot more discussion, and that is foreign policy. And I'm especially delighted that we have one of the most knowledgeable people in the country on foreign policy to be with us today, and that is former Secretary of Defense William J. Perry. As many of you know, Mr. Perry was Secretary of Defense from 1994 through 1997 under President Bill Clinton. In 1994, he worked very hard in attempting to bring together a nuclear agreement between the United States and North Korea, and is very knowledgeable on North Korea. Currently, he is a professor emeritus at Stanford University. Secretary Perry, thank you so much for joining us today.
Senator Sanders, I would just like to say that while the problems you have to face every day are health care, budget, education, and so on, there is a real existential danger in nuclear weapons. And we need to deal with that as a very high priority. And I'm very happy, Senator Sanders, that you've taken the opportunity to deal with this question.
Well, thank you very much. And there is no ifs, buts, or maybes that in a world where many, many countries have nuclear weapons, that this is an issue that we've got to deal with. Let me just begin, Mr. Secretary, by mentioning that you and a number of retired senior security officials released a letter recently urging President Trump to begin negotiations without preconditions with North Korea over its nuclear program. In your judgment, why is that the best course of action? Haven't we tried negotiations with North Korea in the past?
The North Korea today has a real nuclear weapon arsenal, perhaps 20 nuclear weapons. They have hundreds of missiles as well. So it's very dangerous. But North Korea is not a crazy nation. They're reckless, they're ruthless, but they're not crazy. They were open to logic and to reason. Their main objective is to sustain their regime. So if we can find a way of dealing with them that they see gives them an opportunity to sustain the regime, we can get results. We can certainly take things to lower the danger, which is a very great danger today, from their nuclear weapons.
Since North Korean leader Kim Jong-un took power in 2012, as you know, North Korea has moved forward very aggressively in developing its ballistic missile system. Kim Jong-un seems very intent on obtaining an ICBM capability. Do you think that he is a leader with whom we can seriously negotiate?
He's a leader with whom we must negotiate. He's working to get an ICBM. In all probability, he will achieve that goal within a few years. He's not there today, but he will achieve it.
A ICBM which will be capable of reaching the United States?
Yes. In the meantime, he already has medium-range missiles capable of reaching Tokyo, capable of reaching Seoul. So the problem is here and now. We can do things to stop that, to slow it down, and we should be doing those things for our own security.
Tell us a little bit. I mean, what kind of knowledge do we have about Kim Jong-un? You mentioned that he is not crazy. They may be reckless, but not crazy. What do we know about this very, very secretive regime?
Everything we know suggests that he's simply an extension of the Kim family, the leaders they've had in the past. All of them have been ruthless. All of them have been reckless. All of them have pursued a nuclear weapon program. He has inherited a nuclear program, though, that's far advanced from what they inherited, and so he's moving forward with it very aggressively. His main objective is the same as their main objective, which is to sustain the regime in power. And therefore, we have to deal with them. We have to deal with them with the understanding that that's what he's trying to achieve. Our understanding, our goal would be to try to lower the danger from those nuclear weapons and eventually to eliminate it. And I think it's possible to achieve that. It will require, to do this, some teaming with China, because in diplomacy, what we can offer is not a full set. In combination with China, we can put together both the carrots and sticks that would make a persuasive diplomatic package. We cannot simply point to China, though, and say, you solve the problem. We have to work together with them to solve it.
Now, China is far and away North Korea's major trading partner, I believe. But 80% of their trade is with China. Do you have confidence that for whatever reason, China is prepared to do what it takes to develop a nuclear agreement with North Korea?
China, I believe, is much more concerned about the nuclear weapon program in the North than they were a decade ago. So we have their concern, we have their interest. What they have to be convinced of is the negotiating package we put together is not designed to overthrow the regime. That they are opposed to doing. And as long as they think that is our objective, they will not team with us for pact. If we can convince them that we have the same objective, which is to lower the nuclear danger and to eventually reduce it, then I think we can put together a package with China.
What might that look like if China, in fact, was seriously involved in this effort? What might a nuclear agreement look like, actually?
We'd have to look at it in two stages. The first stage agreement would be to lower the dangers. We do that by freezing their missile testing and by freezing their nuclear testing. That's an objective in and of itself worth achieving because it would keep them from getting an ICBM. It would keep them from getting a hydrogen bomb, which would only greatly increase the danger. So that objective is worth achieving. Then, using that as a platform, we could work to get them to roll back the nuclear program. So we'd have to see it, I believe, as the two-stage program.
And what does one offer them to achieve that, do you think?
We have to both offer carrots and sticks. We and our allies, Japan and South Korea, have many carrots to offer. South Korea and Japan have both in the past offered economic incentives and would be willing to offer them again. The U.S. can offer security assurances. That's very important to them. It doesn't cost us anything, but it's something we could offer. The sticks in this diplomatic have to come from China, which is cutting off the trade they have. And they will not do that by themselves, but I think as part of a package, we might be able to persuade them to do it.
All right, so from your perspective, the main goal of the regime is to maintain their power.
That is the goal, to sustain the regime in power. And if they see a package which allows them to do that, they may be willing to cut back the nuclear weapons to get that.
Now, this is a country that has allowed in the past many of its people to literally starve to death in order to fund a nuclear program. Is that correct?
This is an abhorrent regime. It's a regime which we rightly detest. But they do have nuclear weapons. We cannot ignore that fact, and we have to deal with that. Those nuclear weapons pose a danger to South Korea, to Japan, and in time will pose a danger to us.
And to the whole world.
So we have to separate out the variables here, the things they're doing we don't like and the things we're doing which could cause a nuclear catastrophe.
Right. No, I get that. But what I'm suggesting is that in a country with severe economic problems, in a rational situation at least, there are some carrots to be offered in terms of economic
We've
aid.
offered the carrots in the past. The carrots are not enough. They've demonstrated that over and over again. They're willing to suffer economic hardships. They're willing to let their people starve in order to keep the nuclear program. We must learn from that lesson.
All right. Well, if there's anybody who knows about that, I guess it's you. You were heavily involved in that. Could you review for us a little bit of the work that you did in what happened?
I was involved, first of all, when I was Secretary of Defense in '94. The first crisis I faced as Secretary was a crisis in North Korea, and that was in 1994. We nearly went to war with North Korea.
Remind us. Not everybody remembers that.
Yes. North Korea had a nuclear facility at a place called Yongbyon. They were processing plutonium at that. Had they completed that processing, they would have had enough plutonium to build 6 nuclear bombs. We were determined they should not do that, and we confronted them. We threatened them with military action, and we offered them economic incentives. The combination of that led to an agreement called the Agreed Framework, which at least for a period of about 7 or 8 years stopped that program.
It did stop the program.
It did stop the program at Yongbyon. It did not stop their aspirations for nuclear weapons, but it stopped the ongoing program. Had we not had the Agreed Framework, which was signed in 1994, by the year 2000 they could have had as many as 50 nuclear weapons. So it gained us something, but it only bought us time. It did not solve their fundamental problem of how they provide for their security. That's still ahead of us, and that would have to be done in a future negotiation.
Okay. Any more insights? So you negotiated with what, his grandfather, the regime of his grandfather?
That was Kim Il-sung. And then later on in the year 1999, I negotiated with the son, Kim Jong-il. I've not negotiated with the present leader, Kim Jong-un. But I believe these are three of a kind. They're all ruthless, they're all reckless, and they all have this goal of sustaining their dynasty, sustaining the Kim dynasty, sustaining the North Korean regime. That is their overriding goal.
Do you have optimism that the approach that you are suggesting can succeed?
I have optimism that it can succeed if we take the opportunity. I do not have optimism that we're going to take that opportunity. It involves some very sophisticated diplomacy, first and foremost of which is forming some sort of a team with China where we agree on what the objectives are, we agree on what the carrots we're going to offer them, and we agree on what sticks we're going to offer them. If we can put together that diplomatic package, then I think we have a good chance of succeeding. But there's a big if there. It requires us dealing constructively and with intelligence with China to make them see that we're have the same objective and are trying to achieve the same thing.
And what would China's interests be in working with us?
China has at least two overriding objectives in this issue. They do not want North Korea nuclear weapons to do two things. They don't want them to start a regional nuclear war, which would be very bad for them. And they do not want it to precipitate either South Korea or Japan to build their own nuclear weapon program. That would be very adverse to them. So they have strong reasons for wanting to deal with this North Korean nuclear program. We have to put together a package with them which they see that their interests are protected as well as our interests.
Now, in recent years, China has become a bit more distant from North Korea than previously. Is that the case?
That is the case. China is not truly a supporter of North Korea and the North Korean regime. What China is they're protecting them because they fear a collapse of the North Korean regime would be disastrous for China. They particularly do not want a unified Korea dominated by South Korea and with American troops on the Yalu River again. So that's a very serious issue for China.
Is there any likelihood? I know, most Americans know very little about what goes on in North Korea because it's an extraordinarily secretive country.
Indeed.
What is the dynamics? Is there any form of political opposition in North Korea, or does that not exist?
For several U.S. administrations, we have been hoping and praying that the North Korean regime would collapse. That has obviously not happened. And the reason it has not happened is that in spite of the fact that their economy is in the tank, that people have a miserable life, that they have a very oppressive regime, they have a strong secret police, any opposition to the regime is quickly stomped out. So it is a brutal regime, and it's one that does not really permit the conditions which would allow for a successful overthrow of the government. The only way that government might be overthrown would be a coup d'etat conducted within the military. But their secret police are very powerful and very vicious. It is wishful thinking to think that that regime is going to collapse.
Is there anything that we can learn from the recently negotiated Iran nuclear agreement that could give us some lessons for North Korea?
Yes, I believe so. The Iran agreement, I believe, has successfully, as a minimum, put off the North Korean nuclear program for a decade or so. That in itself is worth achieving. It also gives us a platform from which we can go further than that. In the case of North Korea, we should use that as a model, find a way of significantly delaying the North Korean nuclear program and their long-range missile program. I think we can do that. And then from that platform, we may be able to go farther and get an eventual elimination of nuclear weapons in North Korea. We have to understand, though, that they have this regime survival very strongly in mind. They see the nuclear weapon as the key to that. And so they will continue to aspire for nuclear weapons. They may look for ways of evading the agreement as they have for past agreements. So we should be very wary of dealing with North Korea. But the alternatives are very, very stark. The alternative of conducting preemptive strikes against North Korea, which we considered seriously, by the way, in 1994, are very different today. First of all, the advantage of the preemptive strike in 1994 was we could eliminate the nuclear program. It was concentrated in one place. Today, we don't have that alternative. We don't get the benefits of the preemptive strike because the nuclear weapons are dispersed all over the country, no doubt in caves and hard to hit. So we could not have the advantage of the preemptive strike. But the downside of a preemptive strike, which would be a military attack on South Korea, would be even more horrific today than it was in 1994, because it could eventually lead to a nuclear war.
South Korea has a new government. What do you make of their recent overtures? And
It's early to forecast where this South Korean government is going to go, but President Moon campaigned on a program of trying to reach some kind of an agreement with North Korea. And if he cannot reach it with the United States, he may try to reach it without the United States. So it's too early to say where they're going, but I think they're moving in a period of trying to talk, trying to negotiate. And there will be a pressure, I think, for diplomacy from South Korea.
talk for a moment, if you might, as to how South Koreans feel about North Korea and their fears or their hopes of where they would like the future to go.
South Korea has looked at the example of East-West Germany unification. And so many South Koreans, while they emotionally aspire for reunification, intellectually they're very apprehensive about it. They see a reunification as being very economically disadvantaged to the South. But one thing they really do not want is a war with North Korea. So there are different political views within South Korea about how to deal with the North, but there's pretty much a unified view that a war with North Korea would be disastrous for them. There would be millions of casualties in a war with North Korea.
I mean, Seoul is just a few miles away from the border with North Korea.
So it's 1 hour's drive, one hour's drive
drive
from the border, and they're within artillery range of hundreds of artillery pieces along the border. So there would be, even in a conventional war, even in a conventional attack on South Korea, we're talking about the possibility of millions of deaths. If you add to that mix the devil's brew of nuclear weapons, then you can see the total elimination of Seoul. Seoul is a city that has 20 million people in its metropolitan area. So you would have almost half of South Korea destroyed in a nuclear war. South Koreans are very aware of that fact and are not seeking a military solution to the problem. They're looking for a diplomatic solution. President Moon is offering the hopes of a diplomatic solution, which is, I think, one of the reasons he was elected. And the challenge for the United States will be to work a joint program, a joint diplomatic program with the South, where we have the same aspiration to finding a diplomatic solution to this problem.
Okay. Is there anything that we did not go over that you wanted to add?
I would say in particular that the option of a preemptive strike, I want to reemphasize that point, which we had in 1994, are not really there today. A preemptive strike has very few upsides and very many and very great downsides. So I would not recommend today, whereas I considered in the past, I would not recommend it today.
All right. So we have, to say the least, a very, very difficult situation. And a dangerous situation.
It's very dangerous. It's not dangerous because North Korea is going to launch nuclear weapons at Seoul or at Japan or the United States in an unprovoked way. They are not crazy. They know that if they did that, the regime would be destroyed, the country would be devastated. In other words, deterrence does work with North Korea. They're not irrational. But the actions they take and the actions we take could lead to some sort of a military conflict. And that military conflict could very well escalate into a full-scale war. In a full-scale war, North Korea would lose. The military power of the United States and South Korea is far superior to theirs. But as they lost, as the regime saw itself going down in flames, then they might use their nuclear weapons. That's the danger. Not that we would deliberately enter a nuclear war, but that we would blunder into a nuclear war, which would be truly catastrophic.
No, it surely would. Well, Mr. Secretary, you've written a book also. Did you want to say a word about your book?
I've written a book called My Journey at the Nuclear Brink. It's a memoir of sorts, a memoir which focuses on that aspect of my life in which I dealt with nuclear weapons issues. The main message of that book is that today, the danger of a nuclear catastrophe for the United States, the danger of a nuclear catastrophe is actually greater than it was during the Cold War, greater than the Cold War. And yet during the Cold War, we understand that and work to deal with it. Today, our public does not understand or appreciate the problem. The purpose of the book, then, is to educate the public on what those dangers are, and also to describe some things we can do to reduce the dangers. There's a what to do element in the book as well.
All right. Well, there is no question but that when we're dealing with nuclear weapons and the possibility of a nuclear war, which is unthinkable, that this is an issue that has to be widely discussed, and it frankly is not discussed enough. So I thank you very much for your efforts in getting people to start thinking about this issue.
You're welcome, Senator Sanders. And I want to say that I thank you for all of the work you have done in the Senate on many legislations, which I am very supportive of, including in the health care field, the education field, and the budget field. What I'd like to see is a much greater emphasis on the existential dangers of the United States, which are climate change and nuclear weapons. And this is what the purpose of this book, and this is the purpose of this discussion, to draw attention to those dangers.
Well, thank you very much for what you are doing and what you have done.
Thank you, Senator. Thank you, Senator Sanders.
Okay. Take care.